Hi friends! Today I'm going to be critically reflecting on an ongoing situation in my life. There are many people I know that do not realize different oppressions in this world, and we often argue about these types of things. However, there's a certain person in my life that says some really problematic things. I don't want to use a real name during this video, so I'm going to refer to this person as Bob. Bob and I get into heated arguments all the time because he simply does not understand oppression and how much privilege he truly has being a white cis male. There are three very oppressive and offensive things that he stated during this argument. Number one is that it shouldn't be Black Lives Matter, it should be All Lives Matter. Number two, racism isn't a thing because I got into trouble with the authority as well. And number three, there is no such thing as white privilege. All of these arguments that he made interconnect one way or another, but I'm going to be challenging all these things by looking at two theories, political economy and critical race theory. So Vincent Mosco states, the definition of political economy directs the political economist to understand the operation of power, a concept that addresses how people get what they want, even when others do not want them to get it. So basically, people of color have a much harder time with getting basic necessities in our society. And it relates back to political economy because when you've got the top guy who is the white cis male that dominate and spread everything around the economy, including consumer needs, which could be water and food, people of color are usually targeted the most and not given these basic necessities. So Bob states that racism isn't a thing, but then when you look at political economy, you realize that big government, white people, white males, are the reason as to why Black people and anyone of color, anybody that is the other, have these stereotypes attached to them. They have stereotypes like that they only live in poverty, they live off the government, they can't afford this, this, and that. And it's like, well, who do you think makes it so that they don't have the accessibility that everybody else has to get these things? Yeah, they live in these types of homes because they're not given the same privilege as he does. For example, I'm referring to Bob. They state things like Black people are lazy. No, they're not lazy. They're just not given the same opportunity as everybody else. How are you supposed to get a good working job if racism is this blockade that is stopping you because of the color of your skin? Employers do not want to employ you. And that is how political economy works. You've got people that are in charge that are not letting certain people, the other again, come into contact with what they need, which is racism. You can't discriminate against someone based on their color and not give them the same privilege, the same basic necessities that everybody needs. In relation to that, Bell Hooks says, but does anyone believe that food, shelter, basic education, healthcare, other necessities should be distributed according to private wealth? Bell Hooks is basically saying everything that I just said. Everybody, people of color, and everybody that is discriminated against because of the color of their skin, because they are not white, the other, they should all be able to get these basic necessities. It's inhumane to not be able to get these specific necessities. So I look at political economy as class struggle, to be very specific. And again, I'm using that stereotype that people of color do not work hard enough and blah, 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 all these reasons why they don't live these fabulous, luxurious lives, when really it's the system, it's structures that are stopping them. So Bob, racism is a thing. It is very real in our society, very, very, very real. It's in the basics of government. Like, how is it possible that you don't see that they are not given the same opportunities that you are? Erica Ono states, the concept of cultural competence does not adequately examine nor critically question relations of power, the multiplicity of oppressions, and the Eurocentric roots. I would say that Bob is culturally competent because he's basically saying that racism isn't a thing because, he sees that, well, because people of color live among us, that means they're, they're a part of our community and they get everything that they need, just like we do. But he doesn't actually see the Eurocentric roots, and everything is just so white dominated that they don't get the same things that we get, and their experiences are a lot different. And for a white person to say that racism doesn't exist means there's a problem. So I found this quote on the interwebs as I was just browsing, and I'm just going to quickly read it because it relates perfectly to what we're talking about. So it says, racism is a deeply ingrained part of our culture. Sometimes it isn't even conscious. You have to constantly question yourself. It is very difficult to learn 400 plus years of institutional racism. But in order to dismantle systems of injustice, we have to stop pretending that we are not a part of the problem. So in order to stop racism, we first have to admit that we live in a very racist world, and it is whitely dominated. I don't even know if that's a word, but whitely dominated it is. And we need to acknowledge that in order to make a change. And it's really frustrating that Bob didn't see that, and that he thought he was even being oppressed because he was saying that he lived in a very low income area, so cops targeted him as well. And it's true, it's not like cops don't pull over white folk, but they're not targeting you based on your color. They're targeting you because, well, I know you don't know him, but he comes off as a dangerous, up to no good, all up in your face, I'm gonna do something illegal kind of guy. That's why they probably stopped him as a kid, and not because he was white, because let's be real, when does that ever happen? The other thing is too, white people need to stop saying things like racism doesn't exist and telling black people's stories, any person of color stories. You do not have the right to speak for them other than to tell people racism is a thing, which is what I'm doing right now. Not everybody's racist or racism story is the same. Everybody experiences things differently. There's no singular story. But with that being said, it does not give white people more privilege to then talk about it, because that doesn't make any sense. So for Bob to come out and say, well, I did this, this, and this, I never saw this, this, and this, racism isn't a thing, how would you know? You're not a person of color, you've never actually been through it. Just because you were pulled over as a kid and you had black friends doesn't suddenly mean that racism isn't a thing and that you're not racist. You're just extremely privileged and you don't know what the hell you're doing. Another thing that really boggles my mind is that Bob will be the first to say that police brutality is freaking awful and that it needs to stop, and that cops aren't really doing their jobs, but then they're targeting black folk and he doesn't see that. I really have no idea where he gets his opinions and thoughts from, but it's literally in the media all over the place. We are in 2016, people, and this is still happening. Racism is still here. That's why there are movements like the Black Lives Matter movement. That's why we need them, and that's why we need to step up as white people and acknowledge this. So Sana Siddiqui states that many mixed-race individuals are faced with rejection and doubt by others when asserting their self-identification. And she also states that in a study by Townsend of 59 mixed-race college students, over 93% experienced at least one incident of identity denial or constraint, the most common being related to either appearance or filling out documents requiring identification. I'm going to relate this back to employment because that was one of Bob's concerns. He states that because he's Canadian, he deserves all the jobs in the world, basically. And he has access to all sorts of jobs because of his white color, but he doesn't see it that way because he states that when immigrants come in, they create their own jobs, like construction companies, for example, and he says that they're racist towards him because if he tries to get a job there and they're black or Mexican or, you know, all of these others, they won't hire him because they're not the same ethnicity. And it's not the same thing. That is not racism. This is not reverse racism. That doesn't exist. You have so much power. It's not even funny. The fact that these people are trying to self-identify with other people that are struggling and on the same page as them does not mean that they're being racist towards you. It's them just trying to have their own pockets of security and safety and being comfortable in their own skin without having to worry about the white man dictating their lives. So no, it's not the same thing. It's not racism at all. There's no such thing as reverse racism. This color scheme does not go through racism. Something might bother you, something might be offensive, might hurt your feelings. It's not racism. You need to get that out of your mind. The color of your skin does not dictate how human you are, and they go through discrimination all the time. So it speaks volumes about our society where people don't even want to identify as themselves because they know the crap that they're about to get into. And it's been proved that employers will always hire somebody with a whiter name. If that's not racism, I don't know what is. The way I like to look at it is this analogy that, again, I found online. It's basically explaining how if a bunch of us go out for dinner and everybody gets their food except for one person, and that person says, I deserve food too, and then everybody stops eating for like 1 second and says, we all deserve food, and they continue to eat. That's what white privilege is. That's what it's like living in a colored body. That's what it's like in our society. Yeah, okay, everybody deserves food, but you're not paying attention to the one person that doesn't. If this were to happen at the actual dinner table, first of all, I wouldn't have started eating in the first place because that's just how I am. I wait until everybody has their food. But second of all, if I already had my food, I'd be calling that waiter so fast and being like, where is this person's food? They are paying for this. They are valued customers. Give them their food. They deserve food too. Or else I don't even want this. And I swear I'd walk out if that's how they're going to be. People just don't understand oppression at all. They have no idea how it works. They think that a small insult is racism or is any kind of oppression, and that's not the case. So the way I like to look at oppression is looking at it as if you have a spoiled little brat who is the white kid. So this spoiled little brat just constantly wants to talk about themselves, and that's kind of what it's like with white privilege. The white men, in this case Bob, wants to talk about himself and how his life is so hard and how he doesn't get this and that. Meanwhile, that's not the point. He already gets so much, but he wants even more because he's the spoiled little brat. And we can't properly address oppressions if we constantly have to go back and say, don't worry, spoiled brat, you are valued, you are loved, yada yada yada, and then we don't pay enough attention to those who truly need it. Raven Sinclair states that by forcing residential school education on Aboriginal people, the government wielded absolute power in altering language, culture, and socialization. Aboriginal people argue that this form of education amounted to cultural genocide as languages were lost, cultural practices were denigrated, and traditional socialization practices were replaced by institutionalization. So I know I'm referring to Aboriginal people specifically right now, but looking at it like as a whole, despite everything that has happened to them, of course they've been through so much, it's awful what Canadian history is truly like, but anyway, looking at it as a whole, it's basically people in power stripping people of their basic necessities and just basic ways of living, like your language. How is it possible that you get stripped of your language? Does it matter to the government who you're talking to and how you're like communicating with them? They go through so much trouble to strip people of their nationality and heritage and who they are. So as stated before, I relate political economy back to class struggle and how class struggle is mostly impacting people of color. The government goes and apologizes for mistreating the Aboriginal community and whatnot, and so that can't happen anymore. But in modern days, now they just isolate the problem, the other people, the people of color, by, you know, not letting them be accessible to good food, to good housing, basic education, you know, all that good stuff that white people get. The only reason why they're doing that, to be completely honest, and controlling the distribution to people is because they can't get away with residential schools anymore, and hoping that nobody catches on, which apparently it's working, because that would explain Bob. I realized that if I know that something is oppressive and offensive, I'm going to say something about it. I'm going to be an ally about it. I'm not going to speak from experience. I'm not trying to make assumptions about what people of color go through, but I'm just giving facts and what is being seen in society. So this argument that happened between Bob and I happened right in the beginning of the school year. So I didn't have the right information and the right vocabulary to back myself up. We got into a very heated argument. It was a lot of swear words and calling each other names. So this was a great experience for me to be able to go back and say, no, you're still wrong, but this is why I have things to back myself up with. So just don't be ignorant like Bob. Actually see things for what they truly are. My advice is to not be afraid of the unknown. If you don't understand something, it's okay to ask questions. Challenge authority and structures. Just because they are authority and structured doesn't mean that they're perfect, that there's nothing wrong with them. Try to look at things from different people's perspectives. Let others speak for themselves as well, so hear each other out. Understand your own privilege and your own social location, so you can either be an ally or stand up for yourself. That brings us to the end of my critical reflection. I hope you learned something new. I hope Bob opened his eyes by now. Probably not. But thank you for watching, and thank you for listening. Bye.